The sun bled into the horizon, streaking the African sky with fire before sinking into darkness. Dusk was the hour when work in the fields ended, when mothers called their children indoors, and when the bravest hunters quickened their steps home. But on the edge of the forest, where the land dipped into a grove of crooked trees, there lay a place no one lingered: the graveyard. It was not like the rest of the village, bright with laughter, drums, and fires. The graveyard was a place of whispers. Tall grasses leaned over the leaning mounds and crooked wooden markers stood like broken teeth. Even in daylight, people hurried past with lowered eyes, muttering prayers under their breath. But at night no one dared walk near it. Rumors ran through the village like wind. Some swore that strange shapes moved among the graves when the moon was full. Others said voices rose from beneath the earth, singing in a language no one knew. But the most chilling whisper of all was that the stepfather of a young woman forced her into that place when night fell. The girl was 22, thin and worn from hard labor. Her hands were blistered, her skin pale from sleepless nights. Yet behind the exhaustion lived something unbroken, a strength in her eyes, quiet but unyielding. Her name was rarely spoken aloud anymore, drowned beneath curses and rumors spread by those who feared to speak against her stepfather. And her stepfather, he was a man whispered about in tones of dread. Broad-shouldered and hollow-eyed, his presence drained warmth from the air. Children fled when he walked past, elders muttered prayers when he approached. He had once been just another man in the village, but after the death of his wife, the girl's mother, something inside him soured. He grew obsessed with death, with rituals of burial and decay. He lingered too long in the graveyard, speaking to shadows as if they answered him back. The villagers feared him but never opposed him. His cruelty was sharper than a blade, and his grip on the girl was iron. She carried water, gathered wood, cooked, cleaned, and when the sun died and the village grew quiet, he led her with a heavy hand toward the edge of the forest. Whispers followed them always. "There they go again," a woman muttered as she pulled her son inside. "She digs for him," another whispered, shivering. "At night in the graves." "Why does he make her?" someone dared to ask. The answer never came. No one wanted to know. That night was no different. The torches in the village dimmed one by one, until the square lay in shadow. Crickets sang, owls hooted from the trees, and the last traces of firelight flickered in the distance. But on the path to the graveyard, the girl walked barefoot, her wrists raw from the weight of the tools she carried. Her stepfather walked behind her, a twisted smile cutting across his face as he tapped the handle of his whip against his palm. The graveyard loomed ahead, black and endless. The girl's stomach twisted, but she kept walking. She had learned long ago that hesitation only fed his cruelty. At the edge of the graves, he stopped and pressed a rough hand against her shoulder. "Tonight," he muttered, his breath thick and sour, "the earth will be fed again. And you will dig until it is satisfied." The girl closed her eyes for the briefest moment, drawing in the damp scent of soil and grass. She was frail in body, but in her chest her spirit burned. Even here, even in the place of shadows, she would not let him see her break. And so the night began, another night in the graveyard, another night of whispers carried by the wind. Before the graveyard nights, before the whispers of spirits, there was her mother's laughter. The girl remembered it like sunlight, warm, soft, and fleeting. Her mother had been a weaver, known for patterns so delicate they seemed to breathe with life. She sang while she worked, her voice weaving through the hut as skillfully as her fingers wove cloth. For the girl, those days were a small paradise. But paradise ended with illness. It came suddenly, like a storm that gave no warning. Within weeks her mother's body wasted away. The girl remembered sitting at her mother's side, clutching her hand as fever burned her skin. When her mother breathed her last, the girl's world cracked open. It was then her stepfather stepped forward. Not with comfort, not with guidance, but with a shadow that spread over her life. He had married her mother late, after his own fortunes had dwindled. While she lived, he hid his bitterness. Once she was gone, he shed all pretense. The girl, barely into womanhood, became his servant. He commanded her to rise before the sun and grind millet until her palms split. He sent her to fetch water from the farthest stream, forcing her to carry loads fit for 2 men. He denied her food if she faltered, mocked her if she wept, and struck her if she spoke back. The hut that had once been warm with her mother's voice became a place of silence, broken only by the weight of his orders. At first the villagers pitied her. "She has suffered much," they whispered. But pity soon curdled into fear, for her stepfather was a man who inspired unease. He lingered at the edges of funerals, staring too long at the graves. He volunteered to dig when others hesitated, staying late after the mourners left, muttering words that chilled those who heard them. He began to speak of the earth as though it were alive. "The ground must be fed," he said once to an elder who had come to check on him. His eyes gleamed strangely. "If the graves are not filled, the soil hungers. It calls." The elder never returned to his hut. In the weeks that followed, his obsession deepened. He spoke less of the living and more of the dead. When livestock died, he insisted on burying them with rituals that no one recognized. When a child fell ill, he claimed it was because the earth has not eaten enough. And always he dragged the girl into his darkness. "You are the hands," he told her, thrusting a shovel into her grip. "The earth will listen to you. Your blood ties you to the soil." At first he ordered her to dig small pits near the hut, muttering as she shoveled. Then he led her farther, to the edge of the graveyard. Night after night, she dug while the moon hung cold above her. She dug until her arms shook and her breath tore in her throat, while he stood over her, whispering about the hunger of the ground. It became his ritual. When darkness fell, he would march her to the graves. When dawn broke, she would stumble home, her hands caked in soil, her body trembling with exhaustion. The villagers began to notice the changes in her. Her once bright eyes dulled, her shoulders bent, her skin grew pale from the moonlit hours. They saw the bruises on her wrists, the calluses on her palms. But fear of the stepfather sealed their lips. "She is cursed," some muttered, shaking their heads. "She belongs to the graves now," others whispered. The girl heard these words, but she swallowed her pain. She had learned that tears gave her stepfather satisfaction, that weakness made him tighten his grip. Instead, she endured in silence, carrying within her a spark that refused to die. And yet, each night as she dug into the dark soil, she could not shake the feeling that her stepfather's words were not merely madness. The earth did seem heavy beneath her shovel, almost resisting her. Sometimes the soil shuddered faintly as if exhaling. Sometimes, when she paused to wipe the sweat from her brow, she thought she heard a sound, a sigh, a whisper, rising faintly from below. Her stepfather would lean close and hiss in her ear. "Do you hear them? The earth calls. And you will answer." It was in those moments she knew. Cruelty had twisted him into something more than a man. And she, bound to him by fear and grief, was being dragged into his world of graves and shadows. The moon hung pale and sharp above the treetops when he called her. She was grinding millet, her arms heavy from the day's labor, when his voice cut through the night like a blade. "Tonight," he said, standing in the doorway with the shovel clutched in his hand. His shadow stretched long and crooked across the floor. "You will dig. Not near the hut. Not in the forest. You will dig where the ancestors sleep." Her heart stilled. She turned toward him slowly, the pestles slipping from her fingers. "In the graveyard?" she whispered. He smiled, a thin cracked thing. "Yes. The earth must be honored. And you, girl, must learn obedience. The dead will teach you." Her stomach clenched. She had spent nights shoveling soil under his orders, but never among the true graves. The graveyard lay on the edge of the forest, a place children were warned never to enter after dusk. It was said that spirits wandered there, restless and hungry, their shadows clinging to anyone who dared disturb them. She shook her head, her voice breaking. "No, I cannot. The ancestors will be angered." The crack of his hand silenced her. The blow snapped her head to the side and heat spread across her cheek. "You will," he hissed, leaning close. His breath smelled of palm wine and rot. "Do not speak of anger. You are nothing but my servant, and you will dig until I say stop. If the dead whisper, let them whisper to you. It is what you deserve." Tears stung her eyes, but she held them back. She had learned that tears only fed his cruelty. She lowered her gaze, but her voice still trembled. "Please? I am afraid." His eyes gleamed. "Good. Fear is what the earth drinks." He thrust the shovel into her chest so hard it knocked the wind from her lungs. She clutched it, steadying herself as he gripped her arm and dragged her toward the path that led to the graveyard. The village was asleep, huts dark, the night thick with crickets and the occasional cry of a night bird. As they walked, she dared not cry out, for no one would come. Everyone feared him too much. The forest loomed darker than the night itself, the graveyard hidden in its shadow. The trees leaned like silent watchers, and the air was heavy with the scent of damp earth. When they reached the burial ground, she froze. The graves stretched before her in uneven mounds, some fresh, others sunken with age. White stones marked a few, while others were bare save for weeds that clawed upward. The place was hushed but not silent. The air seemed to hum as if holding 1,000 breaths at once. He shoved her forward. There. Between the stones. Dig until your arms ache. Dig until your knees give way. She gripped the shovel tighter, her palms already raw. Why? She asked, her voice shaking. His face hardened and he struck her again, not with his hand this time but with the flat of his fist. She stumbled, tasting blood. Because I command it, he snarled. Because the earth must be fed. Because you must learn there is no escape. Her knees buckled, but she forced herself upright. Slowly she pushed the shovel into the soil. The earth resisted at first, clinging as though it did not want to yield. She dug again, each thrust heavier than the last. The ground was damp, cold, almost alive. Behind her, he stood like a shadow, muttering words she did not recognize. His voice was low and guttural, his whispers threading through the night like smoke. The hairs on her arms rose as she worked. Hours passed, though the moon seemed never to move. Her breath grew ragged, her back screamed with pain, but he did not release her. At last, when the hole was deep enough that she could barely climb out, he spoke again. Good. This is the first. She looked up at him, her chest heaving. The first? He grinned, a horrible expression twisting his face. There will be more. Many more. And when the last grave is dug, you will understand why the earth has chosen you. The girl shuddered, clutching the shovel to her chest. For the first time, she realized that her stepfather's cruelty was more than human malice. It was tethered to something darker, something that breathed in the soil and whispered through the night. And though her body burned with exhaustion, her spirit trembled with a fear she could not name. The moon loomed pale and pitiless above the graveyard, casting silver light over rows of crooked mounds. The shovel's iron blade pierced the earth with a dull thud, over and over, the sound swallowed by the night. Each strike sent shocks through her aching arms, tearing fresh blisters across her palms. Her breath came in ragged bursts. Sweat stung her eyes, mixing with the dust that clung to her face. The grave she had started earlier yawned wider now, its edges collapsing inward as though the soil resisted her intrusion. She dug anyway because stopping meant another blow, another cruel reminder of his power. Behind her, the stepfather stood still, his frame sharp against the moonlight. He leaned against a crooked post at the graveyard's edge, arms folded, watching with a satisfaction that made her skin crawl. His shadow fell long and jagged over the mounds, stretching unnaturally as if it did not belong to him alone. Deeper, he ordered, his voice low, grating. The earth is thirsty tonight. She tightened her grip on the shovel and pushed harder. The soil grew damp the deeper she went, sticking to the blade, weighing her down. Each lift grew heavier, her muscles screaming in protest. Her knees buckled, but she refused to let them touch the cursed ground. The air thickened. Owls screeched from the trees, their cries harsh and relentless, echoing across the graveyard like warnings. Her chest tightened. Every sound seemed amplified, the rasp of her breathing, the scrape of the shovel, the mutters of her stepfather behind her. She dared not look back, for fear of what she might see in his eyes. She paused for a moment, shoulders trembling, fingers raw and bleeding against the wood of the handle. The silence between owl cries felt alive, filled with something watching, waiting. She raised her head, staring at the sky, begging silently for strength. The stars above blurred with tears. Do not stop, he snapped, taking a step forward. His shadow stretched across her shoulders, cold as frost. You belong to the earth, girl. You will dig until it accepts you. Her breath caught. Belong to the earth? The words settled deep into her mind like stones. She wondered if he meant to bury her in the very hole she was carving. The thought gave her strength. She slammed the shovel harder into the soil, the sound ringing like a muffled cry. Each strike became an act of defiance, though her body was near breaking. The shadows around the grave shifted strangely. They seemed to lengthen with every movement of her arms, curling at the edges, reaching toward her feet. The lantern he had set on a stone guttered and flared, though there was no wind. She froze, her hands shaking, the shovel suspended midair. Work, he growled, his eyes glinting red in the flicker of the flame. The night listens. Do you want the dead to hear you idle? Her heart thudded painfully in her chest. She drove the shovel down again, soil spraying up around her. A sickly scent rose from the ground, damp, metallic, like rust or old blood. Her stomach churned, but she swallowed the bile. Hours bled into one another, marked only by the rhythm of digging, the rasp of breath, the occasional hiss of his commands. When at last the grave was deep enough to swallow her whole, she dropped the shovel, her hands trembling violently. She looked up at him, desperate for release. He studied the pit with hungry eyes, then finally nodded. Enough for tonight, he said, turning away. But this is only the beginning. The girl pulled herself out of the hole, her body broken, her spirit raw. Behind her, the grave gaped open under the moonlight, not just a hole in the ground but a wound in the earth itself, waiting to be fed. The soil was heavier that night, damp and clinging as though it did not want to be disturbed. The girl drove the shovel into the ground again and again, each strike muffled as if swallowed before it could echo. Her muscles screamed, the blisters on her hands had split open, and every breath came ragged. Yet she dug because behind her stood the stepfather, arms crossed, eyes glinting with that cruel satisfaction. Then, beneath the scrape of metal against earth, she thought she heard something else. A faint murmur. A sound too soft to belong to the wind. She froze, sweat dripping from her chin, the shovel buried halfway in the soil. Her heart hammered in her chest. The night pressed close, owls falling silent as if holding their breath. "What are you waiting for?" the stepfather barked. His voice cracked across her like a whip. She swallowed, forcing her shaking arms to move again. The shovel lifted, dirt scattering. But the sound returned, clearer this time. A whisper, like many voices speaking at once, curling upward from the pit she was opening. Her throat tightened. She dropped to her knees, hands pressed against the damp earth, straining to listen. The voices rose in fragments, so cold. "Left here, the earth remembers." She flinched back, clutching her chest. Terror twisted through her stomach. They weren't just sounds, they were words. Words spoken by something that should not be speaking at all. "Get up!" the stepfather snarled, grabbing her shoulder and jerking her upright. "You will not stop until I say so. Do you hear me?" Her lips parted, but no answer came. She picked up the shovel again, though her body trembled. Each scoop of soil seemed to release more of those whispers, as if the ground itself exhaled with every wound she carved into it. "We suffered, we were buried in shame, we were left without prayers." The girl's head spun. The voices multiplied, weaving together like a chant. She bit her lip until blood filled her mouth, trying to block them out, but they were inside her, crawling under her skin. "Faster!" the stepfather hissed, looming over her. The ancestors grow impatient. She turned toward him then, wide-eyed. Impatient. He heard nothing, felt nothing, yet spoke as if he knew. Did he not notice the ground humming beneath their feet? Did he not hear the cries? Or had he known all along? The shovel slipped from her blistered hands and clanged against a stone. The sound split the night, and the whispers surged louder, echoing through her bones. Her name. She froze. Her name, clear and unmistakable, hissed from the pit. Amina. Her breath caught. No one called her name at night. No villager dared. Yet here it was, seeping from the soil like breath from the dead. Her knees buckled. She wanted to run, to flee from the graveyard and never return, but the stepfather's hand shot out, forcing the shovel back into her hands. His grip was iron, bruising her skin. "Keep digging," he growled, his breath foul against her ear. "The ground has not had enough." Tears blurred her vision. She drove the shovel down again, sobbing with each strike. The soil groaned, releasing another wave of whispers. Some lamented in sorrow. Others screamed in rage. And always, weaving through them, was her name, rising above the chorus like a warning. The lantern flickered violently, shadows jerking across the graves. The stepfather stood unmoved, but the girl saw the edges of those shadows twist unnaturally, curling into shapes, skeletal fingers, gaping mouths. Her heart pounded so hard it hurt. "Why me?" she whispered hoarsely, gripping the shovel. Her voice cracked against the night. "Why are you calling me?" The earth answered in 1,000 overlapping tones. "Because you listen. Because you are one of us. Because you are ours." The shovel slipped from her hands again. Her breath came fast, ragged, her body frozen with terror. She stumbled back from the pit, but the stepfather seized her arm, yanking her forward. "You dig until I say stop," he hissed, dragging her closer to the hole. "Or you will join them sooner than you think." The words chilled her blood. Join them. Was that his plan? To bury her alive when the graves were deep enough? Lightning flared across the sky, illuminating the graveyard in blinding white. For a moment she swore she saw faces in the soil, hollow eyes, twisted mouths, reaching hands. The light vanished, plunging them back into darkness. She screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the night. The whispers rose in response, louder, a cacophony of grief and fury, filling the air until even her stepfather shifted uneasily. He spat into the pit, muttering a curse. "Ungrateful dead," he said bitterly. "They should be silent." But they were not silent. And now she knew they never would be. As she fell to her knees again, fingers clawing at the damp ground, the voices braided into a single chilling phrase. The earth is not his to command. It is yours. Night blurred into night, each one indistinguishable from the last. When the sun dipped and the village quieted, her torment began. The stepfather's heavy hand would seize her shoulder, and his order, the same every time, dragged her into the darkness of the graveyard. She no longer counted the graves she dug. The holes spread like a disease along the edge of the forest, gaping mouths waiting for offerings. Her palms were shredded leather, the blisters long since torn open. Calluses crusted with blood hardened on her fingers. The shovel's handle was slick with sweat, her own lifeblood smeared into the grain of the wood. Each strike into the soil carried less strength than the last, but she forced herself onward. Because if she faltered, his hand would fall, his belt would lash her back, and his voice, cruel, sharp as broken bone, would slice into her soul. Villagers noticed. How could they not? Her steps during the day dragged, her shoulders hunched like a much older woman's. Her once bright eyes dulled to shadow. Her body thinned, her skin pale as ash. Children whispered that she was becoming a ghost before death. Women passing her at the well shook their heads but turned away quickly, afraid to ask. Men averted their eyes, unwilling to cross her stepfather's wrath. Some whispered she deserved it, cursed as she was. Others pitied her but drowned their pity in silence. Fear kept their tongues tied. And still the nights went on. Every shovel of dirt brought the whispers closer. At first they had been faint, just shadows of sound seeping from the earth. Now they were constant, waiting for her the moment her shovel pierced the ground. Dig deeper. Free us. The earth knows your name. She tried to shut them out, tried to believe exhaustion conjured them. But in her dreams the voices returned, clearer. She dreamt of long, pale hands clawing upward from the soil, their nails crusted with mud. She dreamt of bones rising like roots, twisting and tangling around her arms, pulling her down. She dreamt of her stepfather standing above her grave, laughing as she sank beneath the dirt, while the whispers called her sister. Every morning, she woke with soil beneath her fingernails, though she had not touched the ground since before sleeping. The villagers noticed that too. They muttered behind her back, "She carries the grave dirt with her," and spat on the ground as she passed. Her stepfather only smirked when he heard them. Their fear gave him power. But even he could not ignore the strangeness that grew with every night. Lantern flames sputtered and guttered when she dug. The air around her shimmered, heavy, as if the ground breathed with her movements. Sometimes the graves caved inward too quickly, forcing her to leap back before she was swallowed whole. Other times, the soil seemed to rise up willingly, clinging to her shovel as though eager to be unearthed. One night, she dared to look up from the hole she was digging. Her stepfather stood watching as always, but his eyes gleamed too brightly in the dark, and for a heartbeat, his shadow stretched twice his height, fingers too long, arms too thin. She blinked and it was gone. Still, the memory clung. She dug until her arms gave way and her knees buckled, collapsing into the muck. The stepfather's voice lashed her, dragging her upright again. "You are not done," he said. "The ground is still hungry." The whispers rose with his words, angry now, hissing, "Not his, yours." Tears streaked her dirt-stained face. Her hands shook so badly she could barely grip the shovel, yet she lifted it again. Strike after strike, deeper and deeper, her body a machine of torment. When dawn came, she stumbled back into the village like a shadow, the whispers echoing in her head long after the graves were filled. She would collapse on her mat, eyes wide open, staring at nothing, her dreams waiting for her like open graves. The villagers pretended not to hear her cry in her sleep. They pretended not to see her lips moving as if she spoke to someone unseen. They pretended not to notice the way the ground sometimes trembled faintly beneath her hut at night. And all the while the graveyard grew. One grave became 5. 5 became 10. The line of holes carved into the earth stretched like scars. The girl could feel them even when she wasn't there. A pull, a hum, as though the earth itself had tied invisible strings to her ribs. She was being hollowed out, carved by exhaustion and fear, just as she carved the earth. But the voices did not let her forget. Every night, every dream they reminded her. "You are ours. You are not his. When the last grave is dug, you will know the truth." The sky split open that night, rain slashing through the trees in icy sheets. The graveyard glistened with water, mud pooling between the crooked tombstones. Lightning cracked overhead, turning the night into blinding flashes of white, then plunging everything back into choking darkness. She dug. Her body swayed with every thrust of the shovel, the storm soaking her to the bone, her hands raw and slipping against the wet wood. Each strike into the sodden ground made the earth groan, sucking at the blade as though the soil itself resisted being torn open again. Behind her, the stepfather stood with his cloak pulled tight, unmoved by the weather. His eyes shone each time lightning struck, like twin embers burning out of the storm. "Faster," he barked, his voice carrying through the thunder. "The rain softens the earth for you. You should be grateful." She wanted to scream, to curse him, but all that left her lips was a strangled sob. The storm drowned it instantly. Another flash and she froze. For the briefest moment she saw them. Figures among the stones. Thin, pale shapes standing silently between the graves, their eyes black hollows that seemed to glisten even in the rain. Her breath caught in her chest. The shovel slipped from her hands, landing with a dull thud in the mud. She blinked and they were gone. Only crooked stones and shadows remained. Thunder rolled, low and endless, shaking the earth beneath her knees. She looked back at her stepfather, her face pale with terror. I saw," she stammered, but the words died. He sneered, stepping closer, his boots sinking deep into the mud. "The dead?" he said with a mocking laugh. "Good. Then they know you serve them well." Lightning struck again. The same pale shapes flickered into being, closer this time, standing at the edges of the fresh graves she had dug in nights past. Their mouths did not move, but she heard them in her mind, whispering just above the storm's roar. "Not his. Not his. Yours." Her body trembled violently. She clutched the shovel like a weapon, though she had no strength left in her arms. Her lips parted, but no sound came. The rain blurred her vision, tears lost among the storm. The stepfather's voice cut through again, sharp as a blade. "Do not look at them. They are nothing but shadows." He leaned closer, his breath sour, his words curling like poison in her ear. "They rise because of you. Every grave you open feeds them. And every grave binds you closer to me." She staggered back, shaking her head, rain dripping down her face. "No," she whispered. "Not to you." His hand lashed out, striking her cheek. The crack of it was drowned by thunder, but the sting burned hotter than the lightning above. "You are nothing without me," he snarled. "The dead know who commands them. The dead know who owns you." Lightning tore across the sky again, splitting a tree at the edge of the forest with a deafening crack. In that blinding white light, the figures stood even closer. This time she saw their faces clearly, hollow eyes, stretched mouths, skin sagging as though rotted. Yet beneath the horror, their gaze was fixed not on her, but on him. The shovel trembled in her hands. Her heart pounded so hard it hurt. Thunder rolled, long and deep, shaking the graves as if the earth itself growled in answer. The stepfather smirked, turning away. "Keep digging," he said, raising his voice above the storm. "The night isn't over. And the dead are hungry." She looked back at the open hole yawning at her feet. The mud churned, thick and black, and in its depths she swore she saw a pale hand curl upward before vanishing again. Her breath tore from her lungs in a scream, but the storm swallowed it whole. The rain had passed, but the air was heavy, swollen with the damp weight of the storm. Clouds hung low, veiling the moon so that the graveyard was a hushed and suffocating dark. The stepfather's voice broke that silence, commanding, relentless. "Tonight you dig one more," he said, thrusting the shovel into her blistered hands. His eyes gleamed with an unnatural hunger. Deeper than all the rest. The earth must open wide. Her body ached, every muscle torn from nights of endless labor. Her palms were raw, her back bowed like an old woman's. She wanted to refuse, to drop the shovel into the mud and never lift it again, but his gaze pinned her, heavy as a curse. So she dug. The soil was thick and wet, sucking at her feet. Every thrust of the shovel rang through her bones. Hours seemed to pass, the grave growing deeper, swallowing her little by little. The night pressed in, silence broken only by the scrape of iron against earth and her ragged breath. And then, thunk. The shovel hit something solid. She froze. She struck again, clearing away dirt. The sound was unmistakable, wood. Her heart quickened. She looked up at her stepfather, who stood at the edge, a twisted smile pulling at his lips. "Good," he said softly, almost to himself. "It is waiting." Her hand shook. "But no one was buried here," she whispered. She knew every grave in this ground, she had dug too many. This one should have been empty. The wood shifted under her touch. Not the stillness of old rot, but the faint, living tremor of something that responded. She staggered back in the pit, mud clinging to her legs. There's something inside." A hollow laugh rumbled from her stepfather's throat. "Then keep digging. The earth has chosen. Let it speak. Her breath came in short, panicked gasps. She clawed at the soil with bare hands now, pulling it away until a coffin was exposed, rough, old wood slick with moisture. The smell of rot mixed with something sharper, metallic, almost like blood. The coffin shuddered. Her scream tore through the night, but no one in the village dared come near the cursed graveyard. Only the owls answered, shrieking from the trees. She pressed her ear against the coffin despite her terror, compelled by something beyond reason. For a moment there was silence. Then faint, impossibly faint, came a sound. Tap, tap, tap. Her entire body went cold. She scrambled up the side of the pit, mud slipping under her feet. "There's something alive in there," she cried. "We have to open it." Her stepfather's hand shot out, shoving her back down. She hit the bottom with a sickening thud, pain jolting through her body. Above her, his face loomed, eyes wide and feverish. "No," he hissed. "It is not for you to release. You will finish uncovering it. You will feed it with your hands." The tapping grew louder now, more insistent. Then came a sound that froze her marrow, a muffled voice, hoarse and broken, whispering her name. She pressed herself against the wall of the pit, trembling violently. It knows me." Her stepfather laughed again, his voice a rasp of triumph. "Yes, the grave has always known you. This one was dug for you." The coffin shivered violently, soil cascading down its sides. She clutched the shovel like a weapon, her breath ragged. Each heartbeat pounded in her ears, mixing with the sound inside that box. The knocking, the whispering, the desperate scratching of nails against wood. Her tears mixed with mud as she stared up at her stepfather, who gazed down like a man possessed. "Open it," he commanded. The coffin groaned, wood straining against rusted nails, as though something inside was already forcing its way out. She shook her head, voice breaking. "No, no, I won't." But the choice was slipping from her hands. From within the coffin came a sound no living throat should have made, half a wail, half a moan, echoing with countless voices tangled into one. The earth trembled. The air grew thick and foul, pressing against her lungs. And with a deafening crack, one corner of the coffin split open. A pale hand burst through the wood, slick with earth, clawing toward the night. She dropped the shovel and screamed. The silence of the graveyard shattered with a groan of wood. The coffin lid splintered, hinges screeching as if resisting the will that forced them apart. The young woman pressed herself against the damp earth wall of the pit, heart hammering. She wanted to close her eyes, but some deeper instinct demanded she watch. The lid slid open. Inside lay not bones, not the crumbling remains she had expected, but a body that seemed impossibly untouched by time. A pale figure, skin smooth and ghostly, almost glowing in the half-light. Its chest rose faintly as though drawing breath from the damp earth itself. Then its eyes opened. Two pale orbs gleamed with faint, unearthly light, locking directly onto hers. She gasped, her throat tightening as though invisible hands had clenched around it. The figure's lips parted, dry and cracked, yet words spilled out, not spoken but whispered as though the air itself carried the voice. Her name. Her name, again and again, rising from the coffin like smoke. Each syllable crawled across her skin, sinking into her very bones. She scrambled upward, clawing at the sides of the grave, desperate to escape. Above, her stepfather staggered back a step, the cruel smirk vanishing from his face. For the first time he looked afraid. This is not what was promised," he stammered, his voice breaking. His hand gripped the shovel he carried, but it trembled violently, useless. The figure inside the coffin sat upright with slow, deliberate grace. Soil fell from its hair, black strands clinging to its ghost-pale skin. The glowing eyes never left her, as though it had been waiting for her alone. Her stepfather's breath grew ragged. "No. You belong to me," he spat, forcing bravado into his tone. He jabbed the shovel toward the coffin. "I called you forth. You will serve me." The pale figure turned its head toward him. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then it smiled, a smile too wide, too sharp, stretching lips that should not have moved. The sound that followed was not laughter but something deeper, a chorus of voices echoing through the graveyard, rattling the very air. Her stepfather stumbled, knees buckling. His face drained of color. He took another step back, his eyes wide with the dawning horror of a man realizing he had summoned what he could never control. The figure's gaze swung back to the young woman. It whispered her name again, but this time there was no menace in it. The voice was soft, beckoning, as if urging her closer, as if saying you were never alone. Her lips parted, but no sound emerged. Her hands trembled. She wanted to ask who, or what, It was Wyatt knew her name. Wyatt rose for her. But she could not move. The coffin creaked as the figure placed its hands on the edge and climbed out, movements unnervingly smooth, almost liquid. The ground trembled faintly as its bare feet touched the soil. The grave seemed to sigh, as though relieved of its burden. Her stepfather turned to run. But roots burst from the ground, curling like serpents, tangling around his ankles. He fell hard, screaming as the pale figure advanced. His shovel clattered uselessly against stone. The young woman pulled herself out of the grave at last, collapsing on her hands and knees in the wet soil. Her body shook, her breath coming in gasps. She forced herself to her feet, torn between fleeing and staying to witness. The pale figure stood now in the open, the stormlight painting it in shades of silver and shadow. Its glowing eyes flicked between her and the stepfather. When it spoke again, its lips barely moved, yet the words rolled through the air like thunder. "She knows my name. But you," the voice deepened, twisting into something monstrous as it turned toward the stepfather, "you are nothing." The man's scream split the night, but the graveyard itself seemed to swallow it, pulling him into the silence of the dead. The graveyard quivered with unnatural life. The storm above seemed to pause, clouds churning as though waiting to witness what was about to unfold. The pale figure stood tall now, half shadow, half light, neither corpse nor living soul. Its chest rose and fell in a slow, deliberate rhythm, each breath carrying the sound of 100 whispers. The young woman clutched her arms around herself, shaking. Her stepfather crawled backward through the mud, wild-eyed, his mouth opening and closing in desperate denial. The cruel man who had once commanded the entire household, who had forced her into servitude, now looked like a broken animal cornered in the dark. The figure stepped toward him. Its feet left no prints in the mud. Its eyes glowed faintly brighter with each movement, silver fire burning in hollow sockets. When it spoke, its voice carried on the air like the rustle of 1,000 leaves. "You fed us with cruelty." The stepfather froze, lips quivering. The figure's hand lifted, long pale fingers trembling with unnatural grace, as though every soul buried beneath the graveyard was guiding its movement. The air thickened, heavy with the weight of the dead. The figure's voice deepened, reverberating from the ground itself. "Now, we feed on you." The earth beneath the stepfather cracked. First a line, then a jagged circle spreading outward like the lid of another coffin. He screamed, scrambling to his feet, but roots coiled up immediately, blackened by the storm, clutching his ankles. He thrashed, clawing at the soil, but the roots tightened, drawing blood. "No!" he roared, panic twisting his words. "I did this for you. For the ancestors. For—" His sentence cut off with a choking gasp as the ground beneath him split wider. The soil was no longer earth but a gaping maw, a void that smelled of rot and eternity. From within, faint, skeletal hands reached upward, dozens of them, clutching at his legs, his arms, his clothes. Their touch was not violent, but inevitable, pulling him down with a patience older than time. The young woman staggered backward, horror and awe blurring her senses. She wanted to turn away, yet something inside her demanded she watch. This was not only her tormentor's punishment, it was justice long buried, now unearthed. The stepfather's scream shredded into the night. His fingers dug trenches into the soil as he tried to claw free, mud caking his nails. His eyes locked on the girl, wide, pleading, filled with the terror of a man who had never expected to face consequence. "Help me," he shrieked. "You're my blood, you must help me." She shook her head slowly, tears glistening but resolve hardening in her chest. For years, he had beaten her, degraded her, forced her into the graveyard to serve his twisted obsession. He had spoken of honor for the ancestors, but in truth, he had only fed his cruelty. Now the ancestors themselves had answered. The pale figure bent low, crouching in front of him. Its face was inches from his, eyes burning with cold fire. Its voice dropped to a whisper that slid beneath the thunder, sharp as glass. "The dead remember." With that, the ground yawned wide, swallowing him whole. His final scream was cut short, replaced by a dreadful silence. The soil shivered, then closed over him as though he had never existed. Only the disturbed earth and a faint echo of voices remained. The young woman stood trembling, unable to breathe. She realized the figure was staring at her now, but not with menace. The glow in its eyes softened, as if acknowledging her suffering. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw her mother's face flicker in its features. Gentle, sorrowful, proud. Her knees gave out and she collapsed against the damp grass, weeping. Not just from terror but from the release of years of pain. The man who had enslaved her to his darkness was gone, consumed by the very earth he had worshipped. The figure raised its face to the storm. Lightning cracked, illuminating its form. No longer corpse, no longer man, but something in between, a sentinel of the graves. With a final whisper, word she could not quite hear but felt, it sank back into the soil. The ground closed, leaving no trace but silence. The storm eased. Rain softened to a drizzle. The graveyard exhaled, calm once more. She sat in the mud, soaked and broken but alive. Alone yet freer than she had ever been. Around her, the whispers faded into quiet. And for the first time in years she no longer felt the weight of chains. Years passed, and the graveyard at the edge of the forest grew wilder. Weeds choked the paths, vines curled over cracked tombstones, and owls claimed the branches above. Villagers no longer ventured near, not even in daylight. They whispered that the place was poisoned with memory, that the earth itself breathed with unseen hunger. Some claimed the ground was never still, that it pulsed faintly as though the graves beneath still shifted. The girl survived. She lived quietly at the farthest edge of the village, carrying her solitude like a cloak. Though she was free of her stepfather's cruelty, she bore the weight of that storm-filled night in every breath. The villagers gave her distance, some out of shame, others out of fear. To them she was touched by the grave, spared by something that should have consumed her. Children stared when she passed, whispering behind their hands, but none dared mock her. She was no longer servant, no longer victim. She was something else. Her eyes, once filled with youth and sorrow, now carried the depth of the earth itself. She rarely spoke, but when she did, her words were careful, heavy, as though borrowed from older tongues. The people who once turned away from her cruelty now brought her small offerings of food or cloth, not out of kindness, but out of fear that ignoring her would draw the grave's attention. She accepted little, keeping to herself, her silence stronger than any curse. But at night, when the storms returned, she would wake with a start, the sound of her stepfather's screams echoing in her ears. Lightning would flicker, and she would feel the ground tremble faintly beneath her hut, as though the grave was shifting again. She never went back to the burial ground, but she knew it was waiting for her, watching. The children of the village, too young to know the full truth, made their own tales. They whispered that on nights when the sky cracked open with lightning, the last grave in the corner stirred. Some said the lid of the coffin rose just enough to reveal a hollow darkness inside. Others swore they had seen a pale hand, long and thin, resting on the edge, its fingers curling slightly as if preparing to climb out. Brave children dared each other to approach the forest when storms raged, but none crossed into the graveyard itself. The air there was too heavy, too watchful. Elders warned them with low voices, "Do not mock the soil. Do not call to the dead. That grave is not like the others. It remembers." And so the legend grew. The grave that swallowed a cruel man became the grave that watched, listening for footsteps, waiting for voices. The villagers said the earth had taken him, but it had not closed fully. Something of him lingered, scratching at the coffin lid, restless, yearning for release. The girl, now a woman, heard these whispers but did not correct them. In her heart, she knew the truth was stranger than anything the villagers could imagine. The pale figure that had risen that night had not been her stepfather, nor had it been a simple ghost. It had been something deeper, the voice of the buried dead, a sentinel of every cruelty laid beneath the soil. And though her tormentor was gone, his punishment was not finished. The ground still held him, restless, gnawing in silence. On one stormy night, as the sky bled with lightning, a group of children huddled in a hut, too frightened to sleep. One asked in a trembling whisper, "What if he climbs out?" The others fell silent, too afraid to answer. But outside, the thunder rolled, and in the distance, the burial ground seemed to breathe. The rain poured heavy, drowning the earth, and for a moment, the lightning struck so bright it illuminated the graveyard. Anyone watching would have seen it clearly, the last grave, its soil unsettled, its coffin lid half open. And resting upon it, pale, skeletal fingers curled over the edge, gripping as though the dead within were waiting for the right storm to rise again. The villagers swore it was true. That every storm carried his struggle, that his cries rode on the wind, that the grave itself had become a doorway never fully closed. And so, even generations later, no one dared step into that place. The graveyard remained silent but not empty. It watched. It waited. And in every flash of lightning, a pale hand promised that the soil would one day give back what it had swallowed.